escaping shipwreck and death; alluded to the tumult, bustle, and confusion of battle, yet even there the hero clings to life. The court adverted not only to the certainty of their coming doom on earth, but to think of hereafter, that they should seriously think and reflect of their future state, that they would be assisted in their devotions no doubt by many pious men. When the court closed, Charles Gibbs asked if during his imprisonment his friends would be permitted to see him. The court answered that that lay with the marshal, who then said that no difficulty would exist on that score. The remarks of the prisoners were delivered in a strong, full toned, and unwavering voice, and they both seemed perfectly resigned to the fate which inevitably awaited them. While Judge Betts was delivering his address to them, Wansley was deeply affected and shed tears, but Gibbs gazed with a steady and unwavering eye, and no sign betrayed the least emotion of his heart. After his condemnation, and during his confinement, his frame became somewhat enfeebled, his face paler, and his eyes more sunken, but the air of his bold, enterprising, and desperate mind still remained. In his narrow cell he seemed more like an object of pity than vengeance, was affable and communicative, and when he smiled, exhibited so mild and gentle a countenance, that no one would take him to be a villain. His conversation was concise and pertinent, and his style of illustration quite original. Gibbs was married in Buenos Ayres, where he has a child now living. His wife is dead. By a singular concurrence of circumstances, the woman with whom he became acquainted in Liverpool, and who is said at that time to have borne a decent character, was lodged in the same prison with himself. During his confinement he wrote her 2 letters. One of them is subjoined, to gratify the perhaps innocent curiosity which is naturally felt to know the peculiarities of a man's mind and feelings under such circumstances, and not for the purpose of intimating a belief that he was truly penitent. The reader will be surprised with the apparent readiness with which he made quotations from Scripture. Bellevue Prison, March 20th, 1831. It is with regret that I take my pen in hand to address you with these few lines, under the great embarrassment of my feelings placed within these gloomy walls, my body bound with chains, and under the awful sentence of death. It is enough to throw the strongest mind into gloomy prospects. But I find that Jesus Christ is sufficient to give consolation to the most despairing soul. For he saith that he that cometh to me I will in no ways cast out. But it is impossible to describe unto you the horror of my feelings. My breast is like the tempestuous ocean, raging in its own shame, harrowing up the bottom of my soul. But I look forward to that serene calm when I shall sleep with kings and counsellors of the earth. There the wicked cease from troubling, and there the weary are at rest. There the prisoners rest together. They hear not the voice of the oppressor, and I trust that there my breast will not be ruffled by the storm of sin, for the thing which I greatly feared has come upon me. I was not in safety, nor had I rest. Yet trouble came. It is the Lord, let him do what seemeth to him good. When I saw you in Liverpool, and a peaceful calm wafted across both our breasts, and justice no claim upon us, little did I think to meet you in the gloomy walls of a strong prison, and the arm of justice stretched out with the sword of law, awaiting the appointed period to execute the dreadful sentence. I have had a fair prospect in the world. At last it budded, and brought forth the gallows. I am shortly to mount the scaffold, and to bid adieu to this world, and all that was ever dear to my breast. But I trust when my body is mounted on the gallows high, the heavens above will smile and pity me. I hope that you will reflect on your past, and fly to that Jesus who stands with open arms to receive you. Your character is lost, it is true. When the wicked turneth from the wickedness that they have committed, they shall save their soul alive. Let us imagine for a moment that we see the soul standing before the awful tribunal, and we hear its dreadful sentence, "Depart ye cursed into everlasting fire." Imagine you hear the awful lamentations of a soul in hell. It would be enough to melt your heart, if it was as hard as adamant. You would fall upon your knees and plead for God's mercy, as a famished person would for food, or as a dying criminal would for a pardon. We soon, very soon, must go the way whence we shall ne'er return. Our names will be struck off the records of the living, and enrolled in the vast catalogues of the dead. But may it ne'er be numbered with the damned. I hope it will please God to set you at your liberty, and that you may see the sins and follies of your past life. I shall now close my letter with a few words which I hope you will receive as from a dying man, and I hope that every important truth of this letter may sink deep in your heart, and be a lesson to you through life. Rising griefs distress my soul, and tears on tears successive roll, for many an evil voice is near, to chide my woes and mock my fear, and silent memory weeps alone, o'er hours of peace and gladness known. I still remain your sincere friend, Charles Gibbs. In another letter which the wretched Gibbs wrote after his condemnation to one who had been his early friend, he writes as follows: "Alas, it is now, and not until now, that I have become sensible of my wicked life, from my childhood, and the enormity of the crime, for which I must shortly suffer an ignominious death. I would to God that I never had been born, or that I had died in my infancy. The hour of reflection has indeed come, but come too late to prevent justice from cutting me off. My mind recoils with horror at the thoughts of the unnatural deeds of which I have been guilty. My repose rather prevents than affords me relief, as my mind, while I slumber, is constantly disturbed by frightful dreams of my approaching awful dissolution." On Friday, April 22d, Gibbs and Wansley paid the penalty for their crimes. Both prisoners arrived at the gallows at 12 o'clock, accompanied by the marshal, his aides, and some 20 or 30 United States Marines. 2 clergymen attended them to the fatal spot, where everything being in readiness, and the ropes adjusted about their necks, the throne of mercy was fervently addressed in their behalf. Wansley then prayed earnestly himself, and afterwards joined in singing a hymn. These exercises concluded, Gibbs addressed the spectators nearly as follows: "My dear friends, my crimes have been heinous, and although I am now about to suffer for the murder of Mr. Roberts, I solemnly declare my innocence of the transaction. It is true, I stood by and saw the fatal deed done, and stretched not forth my arm to save him. The technicalities of the law believe me guilty of the charge. But in the presence of my God, before whom I shall be in a few minutes, I declare I did not murder him. I have made a full and frank confession to Mr. Hopson, which probably most of my hearers present have already read, and should any of the friends of those whom I have been accessory to, or engaged in the murder of, be now present, before my Maker I beg their forgiveness. It is the only boon I ask; and as I hope for pardon through the blood of Christ, surely this request will not be withheld by man, to a worm like myself, standing as I do, on the very verge of eternity. Another moment and I cease to exist. And could I find in my bosom room to imagine that the spectators now assembled had forgiven me, the scaffold would have no terrors, nor could the precept which my much respected friend, the Marshal of the District, is about to execute. Let me then, in this public manner, return my sincere thanks to him, for his kind and gentlemanly deportment during my confinement. He was to me like a father, and his humanity to a dying man, I hope, will be duly appreciated by an enlightened community. My first crime was piracy, for which my life would pay for forfeit on conviction. No punishment could be inflicted on me further than that, and therefore I had nothing to fear but detection; for had my offences been millions of times more aggravated than they are now, death must have satisfied all." Gibbs having concluded, Wansley began. He said he might be called a pirate, a robber, and a murderer, and he was all of these, but he hoped and trusted God would, through Christ, wash away his aggravated crimes and offences, and not cast him entirely out. His feelings, he said, were so overpowered that he hardly knew how to address those about him; but he frankly admitted the justness of the sentence, and concluded by declaring that he had no hope of pardon except through the atoning blood of his Redeemer, and wished that his sad fate might teach others to shun the broad road to ruin, and travel in that of virtue, which would lead to honor and happiness in this world, and an immortal crown of glory in that to come. He then shook hands with Gibbs, the officers, and clergymen. Their caps were drawn over their faces; a handkerchief dropped by Gibbs as a signal to the executioner caused the cord to be severed, and in an instant they were suspended in air. Wansley folded his hands before him, soon died with very trifling struggles. Gibbs died hard, before he was run up, and did not again remove them, but after being near 2 minutes suspended, he raised his right hand and partially removed his cap, and in the course of another minute raised the same hand to his mouth. His dress was a blue round about jacket and trousers, with a foul anchor in white on his right arm. Wansley wore a white frock coat, trimmed with black, with trousers of the same color. After the bodies had remained on the gallows the usual time, they were taken down and given to the surgeons for dissection.